I'm Jason Hager, and this is Marketing Notes for Entrepreneurs from Grayleaf Media, where impact-driven leaders use trust, clarity, and strategy to turn good work into sustainable growth. This is the 9th episode in our series on how a wrong ICP cascades through your entire marketing system. For the last 6 episodes, we've talked about how a wrong ideal customer profile breaks specific things: your messaging, your positioning, your product, your pricing, your retention. Today, how it breaks all of them at the same time. You can build a great product, develop smart positioning, and write clear messaging. You can price it well and retain customers, and still fail. Not because any of those things are wrong, but because all of them are operating in the wrong environment. The problem isn't quality or execution, it's alignment. There's a principle in ecology worth thinking about. It's not enough for an organism to be strong, well-adapted, and capable. If it's in the wrong ecosystem, none of that matters. A redwood doesn't struggle in the desert because it's a bad tree. It struggles because the desert isn't where redwoods belong. Move it to the Pacific coast. Give it fog, deep, living soil, the right conditions. It becomes one of the largest living things on Earth. That's not a story about the quality of the tree. It's a story about the relationship between an organism and its environment. Your business is the same way. When your ICP is wrong, you're not failing because your product is bad, or your pricing is off, or your messaging isn't clear enough. You're a redwood in the desert, trying to thrive in an environment you weren't built for. This means that fixing your messaging doesn't solve it. Better pricing doesn't solve it. Tighter retention tactics don't solve it. You can execute all of those things at a very high level and still feel like growth is harder than it should be, because the problem is usually alignment, not execution. That's what this episode is about. Not another system that breaks. The reason all of them break, and why fixing one at a time doesn't work. This is episode 17, The Cascade Effect. Let's talk about what happens when the wrong ICP doesn't just break one thing, it breaks the whole system at once. Let's start with the environment problem. In permaculture and ecology, there's a concept called niche. Every organism has one. It's not just about habitat, it's about the specific relationship between that organism and its environment. The soil, the water, the light, the other organisms around it. When that relationship is right, the organism doesn't just survive. It becomes part of a healthy system and thrives. It contributes. It compounds. When the niche is wrong, the organism struggles to stay alive. And if it does survive, it's often at the expense of its neighbors. That's not thriving. And I doubt that's the goal for anyone listening to this. Most businesses operating with the wrong ICP are doing exactly that. Surviving, but at a cost. Expending energy that should be generating growth, just holding on. And often without realizing it, at the expense of the customers who deserved better. The point I want you to pay attention to is that this isn't a performance problem. The organism isn't failing because it's weak. It's failing because the environment isn't the one it was built for. This is the distinction most businesses miss when they start trying to fix things. They look at performance. Messaging isn't converting. Pricing is getting pushed back on. Retention is quietly eroding. And they treat each one as a separate failure. They optimize. They test. They adjust. The numbers shift a little. The problem doesn't. Because the problem isn't the performance. It's the environment. So how does the cascade actually work? Let's walk through it. Wrong ICP means you've built your positioning around a customer you assumed would buy. This means your messaging is written for that customer. It speaks to their problems, their language, their decision-making process. So the customers who actually show up read that messaging, and something feels slightly off. Sometimes they can articulate it. Often they can't. They don't fully know their own needs yet, or they don't understand how to find or recognize the right solution. Either way, the friction is real. Not enough to turn them away entirely, just slightly misaligned. So they come in. And because the messaging was written for someone else, the sales conversation is harder than it should be. You're explaining things that shouldn't need explaining. You're justifying value that should be obvious to the right customer. The close takes longer. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all. The customers who do close, they bought despite the friction, not because of a perfect fit. This means they came in with a different set of expectations than your business was built to serve. So your product or service, as good as it is, keeps brushing up against those expectations. Not dramatically, just consistently. This means pricing becomes a negotiation. Not because your price is wrong, but because the customer across the table doesn't fully see the value. Because the value was designed for someone else. And because switching is hard, they stay quietly. No referrals, no expansion, no real engagement. Just inertia. This is the cascade. Each broken system feeds the next, and every single one of them traces back to the same root, the wrong environment. Now let's talk about why fixing one thing doesn't work. Here's where most businesses get stuck. They feel friction in sales, so they rewrite their messaging. The new messaging is objectively better, cleaner, sharper, more compelling, and it helps a little. But the underlying customer mismatch is still there, so the improvement plateaus quickly. They feel the pricing pushback, so they restructure their offers. Add a tier here, reframe the value there. It helps at the margin. The real problem doesn't move. They feel the retention erosion, so they invest in customer success. More check-ins, better onboarding, tighter processes. the customers stay a little longer. They still don't refer. They still don't expand. This is what the cascade does to a business over time. It creates an endless cycle of localized fixes that never address the root. And the painful part, the really painful part, is that every one of those fixes is good work. The messaging is genuinely better. The pricing structure is genuinely smarter. The retention process is genuinely more attentive. None of it is wasted. It just can't do what it's being asked to do because it's still operating in the wrong environment. You can't fix an ecosystem mismatch by optimizing the organism. Now, what does alignment actually look like? When the ICP is right, when the environment fits, something shifts in how all of those systems feel. Messaging lands without explanation. The right customer reads it and feels like you're already inside the problem they're carrying. Sales conversations move differently. Not because you're a better closer, but because the customer already understands the value before you explain it. Pricing feels appropriate to them, not because it's low, but because they see exactly what they're getting, and it makes sense. And retention. This is the one I want you to notice. Retention becomes something different entirely. It stops being a strategy and starts being a byproduct. The right customer doesn't stay because switching is hard. They stay because leaving doesn't make sense. They refer not because you asked them to, but because they want the people around them to have the same experience. They expand because they trust what you built. This is the symbiotic relationship. Not just customer and vendor. A real fit between what you built and the environment you're building it for. Right thing, right environment, right time. That's where the goal is. So, where do you start? The cascade runs in one direction. Wrong ICP to everything downstream. This means the fix runs in the same direction. You start with the ICP, not the messaging, not the pricing, not the retention. The ICP. Because until that's right, you're optimizing the wrong environment. Next episode, episode 18, is where we get into exactly how to do that. How to identify the drift. How to rebuild from what's actually true about your best customers. How to make the ICP a living thing in your business, rather than a one-time exercise. But before we get there, ask yourself which of the systems we've talked about over the last 9 episodes feels hardest in your business right now. Messaging that isn't landing? Pricing that keeps getting pushed back on? Retention that looks stable but feels hollow? That friction is a signal. It's pointing upstream. And upstream is always the same place. One question before you close this out. If you pulled back far enough to see your entire marketing system at once, the messaging, the positioning, the product, the pricing, the retention. Does it feel like a system that's thriving? Or does it feel like a system that's working hard just to hold on? The difference isn't execution. It's environment. If today raised questions about whether your ICP is actually right, and whether the friction you're feeling is downstream of a root you haven't addressed yet, the ICP Toolkit is where to start. It's a free 15-page download that walks you through who's actually buying from you and how to build your messaging around them. grayleafmedia.com/find-your-ICP. If the cascade we talked about today sounds familiar, if you're seeing the pattern across multiple systems in your business, brand therapy is where to go deeper. It's a diagnostic process designed to surface exactly that kind of systemic misalignment. grayleafmedia.com/diagnostic. If this episode resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you shared it with a founder who's been fixing the same problem over and over without it staying fixed. A review wherever you listen also goes a long way toward helping this show find the people it's built for. Next time, Episode 18, The Living ICP. How to know when your ICP has drifted, how to rebuild it from reality, and why this isn't a one-time exercise. Until then, stop fixing the symptoms. The signal is always pointing upstream.